Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our Committee of the Whole and then right after Council meeting of February the 18th. We're all ready. Our first order of business is the adoption of the minutes, and I need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Lefebvre, seconded by Councillor Powell-Davidson. Are there any errors or omissions of the minutes from the September 17th meeting? And that was the Committee of the Whole, of course. All right, seeing none, all in favor, opposed, and that's carried. Thank you. We're now moving into our public presentations. We have two public presentations this evening. The first is of the Rotary Clubs of Parksville regarding the proclamation of Rotary Day in Parksville. And I see Mr. Burden. I take it you'll be making this presentation? Excellent. You know how it all works? Once or twice you've been here, yeah. Floor is yours, sir.
Again. Good evening, and Mayor Berger and Council, thank you very much for this opportunity. Rotary is an organization of business and professional leaders united worldwide, providing humanitarian service, encouraging high ethical standards in all vocations, and helping build goodwill and peace in the world. In more than 160 countries worldwide, approximately 1.2 million Rotarians belong to more than 30,000 Rotary clubs. Rotary International was founded by Paul Harris on February 23rd in Chicago, Illinois, and I forgot the exact date, 2019. Don will know. 05. Thank you, Don. In British Columbia, which is why I'm here today, the first Rotary Club was chartered in 1913. So we're celebrating 100 years of service to communities. Service that includes a variety of projects like the Parksville Community and Conference Center, the Field House at Springwood Park, the Rotary Peace Park at the entrance to our city, the WOW Bus through the Building Learning Together, and a host of similar projects and services. In Parksville, the first Rotary Club was chartered in 1987. Internationally, Rotarians have contributed funds and volunteers to provide medical services, medical supplies, health care, clean water, food production, job training, and education to millions in need. One of the most publicized Rotary programs recently has been the eradication of polio. This goal will be achieved within the next few years, which is an amazing concept. To date, Rotary has contributed $1.2 billion and countless volunteer hours, achieving a global drop in polio cases of 99%, and this effort started in 1985. The first Rotary Club in British Columbia was chartered in Vancouver. Today, there are 170 clubs in BC with over 5,700 members, and it is our hope that Parksville will join communities across the province celebrating 100 years of Rotary by proclaiming February 23rd as Rotary Day in Parksville.
All right, very good. So I will open the floor to questions and comments from members of council. Fairly straightforward. Councillor Powell-Davidson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Kim, for coming to speak to us this evening about Rotary. I just wanted to share with council that I had the privilege of speaking with the Rotary AM Club that was this week, long week. No, it was last week. Long day. And I was honored at the end of it when I was presented with a certificate, or rather, there was a certificate that said that a contribution had been made in my name towards 10 children becoming vaccinated against polio. And I must say that was one of the most moving gifts I've ever had, and I was very honored, and I really, really enjoyed my time that I spent with Rotary AM, though they do meet at an ungodly hour. Thank you for coming this evening.
Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for coming, Kim. The work that Rotary does is well documented Canada-wide and worldwide, and it's certainly a privilege and a pleasure to have Rotary in our community. Thank you. Thank you to all you and all your members.
Thank you.
So the only thing I would add is that not to belittle some of the international efforts, But certainly those of us, and I think I can speak for everyone around this table here, that have spent any amount of time at the city and in the community in that capacity understand all too well just how impactful our various Rotary organizations are here for some of the projects you just mentioned, but it really goes beyond that. And so, we think it's wonderful, and I congratulate you for your service and for all that your membership does on behalf of a whole lot of different people. Now, we have in our packages a Rotary International proclamation, and although Council, through its foolishness, has by policy given me the power to proclaim without a resolution, I thought since the proclamation is here before us, there's nothing in that policy that prevents us from proclaiming by way of resolution. And so to that end, if someone is prepared to move that, obviously the blanks would be filled in appropriately for the time, place, and the city. So moved by Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Powell-Davidson. Is there anyone else wishing to speak to that motion? Didn't think so. All in favor? Opposed? So there you have it, Mr. Burden. The February 23rd is officially proclaimed here in the city of Parksville.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now I guess the shoe's on the other foot. So I will pass it over to whomever I should be passing it over to.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to use this mic so everybody can hear me. I just wish to congratulate our mayor, who this evening will be receiving an award, the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal in honor of his contribution to local government. And presenting that award, it gives me a great honor to welcome to our chambers Dr. James Lunny, Member of Parliament for Nanaimo, Alberni, and I'm going to let him come and take over. He will be here to present the award to Mayor Berger. Welcome, Dr. Lunny.
Well, good evening, and thank you very much. It is indeed a great pleasure and honor to be here tonight for several reasons. Well, number one, I've been in the council chambers before, but I don't think I've been here with a full working council and staff for some time. It's great to see all of you hard working for the citizens of our great city. Secondly, if you'll allow me to say so, it's been a great pleasure that the federal government's been able to partner on a number of important infrastructure projects that are important to the community here. Had an announcement just recently in January, and I believe there's more coming, so stay tuned. It's my distinct pleasure to be invited here tonight to bestow a particular honor upon the mayor of this fair city. And just a few words about the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal. Of course, the event that we've been celebrating for the past year is the 60th anniversary of the accession to the throne of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. There have been celebrations for the complete year. I'm sure a lot of you have watched some of these great events from the UK and across our own country. Some 60,000 medals were minted by the Canadian government to honor citizens at this important occasion. And these are citizens that have distinguished themselves in service to country, to community. As the MP for Nanaimo, Alberni, we've distributed some 30 medals to worthy individuals at 2 public events, including 9 or 10 individuals from this fine city of Parksville and the Qualicum area. Medals have been distributed by MPs, by MLAs, by lieutenant governors, by the Prime Minister himself, by other organizations such as the National Firefighters, the Royal Canadian Legion, amongst other organizations. All of this was supervised by the Governor-General of Canada, and of course by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. All of the recipients are recorded in the official records of the Government of Canada. Mayor Berger's years of public service, first as a councillor for many years, and then as acting mayor at the decision of council, as was necessitated previously. And since the last election as the mayor of our fine city, have already been expounded a little bit by Councillor Powell-Davidson. And Mayor Chris Berger, it is my great pleasure to be here tonight to award you Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal on behalf of your service to this city and to our community. So if I may, we will present you with the honors.
And Dr. Lunny, please come back. Please keep on coming back.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, and I will now return us to our regular programming. I did jump a little bit there. You'll note that in the council meeting there was to be a presentation at a later time. However, based on Dr. Lundy's schedule, we've moved that forward, obviously, so we'll make that change when the time comes. And we'll now move to our second public presentation, none other than Chris Midgley from the Regional District of Nanaimo, who will be speaking with us on rainwater harvesting best practices. Give him a few moments to get everything organized.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship, councillors, and members of the public for having me. My name is Chris Midgley from the Regional District of Nanaimo, working on energy and sustainability initiatives here. The impetus for this particular presentation came out of one of our Sustainability Select Committee meetings, whereby I was invited by Councillor Lefebvre to come and make a similar presentation to this council of the City of Parksville. So here we are. It's a fairly high-level, quick overview. We provided you with the actual document itself, so you received a copy of the Rainwater Guide, and the document is also in circulation in the Vancouver Island Regional Library, so you can communicate that to your community constituents and that so forth. It's a very dense book. There's a lot of information there. I think it's good information, but I'm going to just graze the surface of it as I go through this, trying to touch on a few of the issues that I think might be relevant to yourselves and that might be of interest. So why? Why did we go ahead and produce this guidebook? I think it really originates out of a lot of the work at the regional district level, and that includes the member municipalities, including the City of Parksville, showing a persistent and high level of concern over water within our communities, the use of water, availability of water, that sort of thing. And so through our Drinking Water Watershed Protection Program, we undertake various education and outreach initiatives, conservation initiatives, among other things. This is obviously a very short list, but also began providing rainwater incentives in select areas within the regional district. So we were providing up to $750 for households who would install a cistern plus pumps and pipes and all the rest of it. So so people were eligible for an incentive without much information behind what that might include. Similarly, we have a Green Building Action Plan, and while you typically consider energy conservation, renewable material production, that sort of thing, indoor air quality, water use is obviously a significant piece of green buildings within a community or within a household. And the goal of that action plan is to increase the number of green buildings in the region. So part of our goal with that program is, again, outreach and communications, providing information, practical, hands-on, useful information to members of the public. So we had decided to undertake this guidebook series as a rule, wondering and bounced around various ideas. What should the first topic be? So considering, again, the Drinking Water Watershed Protection Program, plus we had established a development permit area in the southern area of the regional district in electoral area A in the vicinity of Cedar, which it's the Yellow Point Aquifer Protection Development Permit area, which requires homeowners who build beyond a certain size or new development to incorporate a rainwater capture system into their homes. So again, we're creating the context to need these systems, but without a base level of information, really. And just from a local government perspective, the funding for the guidebook came through this Green Building Action Plan, where we allocated through our Community Works Fund $20,000 to put toward the project. So a fairly modest price tag, all things considered, and one that I think was a valuable contribution to our work. So obviously we were building the interest, we're setting the need with regulations and so forth, so we thought it was incumbent upon ourselves to provide residents with the tools to actually go into these situations with their eyes open, with a level of understanding of what these systems look like, how they're built, what they're made of, who might help build them, that sort of thing. So basically, in a nutshell, the purpose is to inform and assist interested homeowners about methods and best practices for using rain as an alternative source. The important point that we tried to stress all along was that this is not a handbook, it's not a manual. This is outlining best practices. We don't want someone to look at this book and think they can go build something. We just want them to not go into it blind. We want them to go with a good understanding of what these systems look like and what they're built with. So there's generally a couple of key questions in the basics. So how much water can I get and how much water do I need, if you can simplify it that far down. So a handy how much water can I get sort of soundbite back of the envelope rule of thumb. For every millimeter of precipitation, rain that falls, you get a liter of water for every square meter of roof area. It's a good, handy little ballpark number. And when you start looking at your roofs, you realize, wow, we can get a lot of water really fast when the rain starts pouring. There's also limits. You can obviously only capture as much rain as you have a roof area, the roof area not being the actual surface area of the roof, but the footprint. And through the calculations in our guidebook, sort of came to the realization that for a 3-person water-conserving household, providing all of their needs through rainwater, you'd need at least a 210 square meter roof area. You can't get all of your needs with a small house necessarily. You have to have a sufficient roof area. So those are the sort of the limits determining how much water can you get. So how much water I need, well, that becomes a question on what do you tend to use it for. So sorry for the graphic here. I just lifted it out of the document. You could see it there on page 25. This is a typical sort of household outdoor summertime use. You can see that summers up to 50%, toilets 10 to 20. I think historically that might have been 30%, but as we start seeing more low flush and dual flush toilets, that number is dropping off. And so when an individual decides they want to build a system, they've got to determine which of these uses they intend to use, and that'll dictate how much of the roof they're collecting water off, how much storage, the size of the pumps, the nature of the filtration, and so forth. All of that is detailed pretty closely in your document. So there are 3 rainwater systems that we would really talk about through this guide. A outdoor non-potable use, your typical kind of garden rainwater system. There's indoor non-potable uses. So that would most typically be using rainwater to flush your toilets. And then finally, sort of the full meal deal, the indoor potable all uses. And those are sort of the 3 categories of systems that escalate significantly in complexity as you go forward. Nevertheless, there's sort of consistency across those systems. So obviously you want to capture and move the rainwater. This is your roof, and this is your gutters and downspouts. They, no need for further details. Your first next step is to sort of initially clean and divert. So get the big debris out and divert your first flush. So you've got your first flush diverters, big filters, gutter covers, that kind of thing. Again, all very much closely detailed in the document. Then your water goes to storage. So you're talking about cisterns. Alternate supply refers to if you don't build a large system, you can bring in the public sort of water supply or a well water supply and supplement as your system drops down. And design. So cisterns, when I say design, cisterns can be large, they can be ugly, they may need, plantings around them, they may need, architectural features so that they're hidden from your neighbors. That's just a consideration. Then pressurization, because you need pressurization, and gravity will never work unless you have a huge volume very high up, and this, strictly speaking, not going to happen. So pumps and power, and then additional storage, so you might get a small pressurized tank. And finally, all those steps lead up to any type of system you want, whether it's a rainwater system or a full-on potable home system. And then finally, as you get into the more potable uses, you're talking about purification and disinfection. So disinfection being sort of the UV filtration, getting rid of the bacteria, viruses, that sort of thing, and filtration being down to micron level. So again, just looking very crudely at a fairly simple outdoor non-potable system, you can see these are the key features that are detailed in the document. Just your gutters, your downspouts, first flush diverters. This is basically almost as simple as it gets. The step below this would be basically your rain barrel, which doesn't really count. I mean, that's minimal storage, no treatment. I mean, it's just not really a comprehensive system. So this is your lowest level sort of comprehensive system. In indoor potable use, you think of these as like buying a new car, so you're optioning it up. This is everything that's in an irrigation outdoor system plus a handful of things. So I've highlighted out what a few of these items are, like a fine mesh filter. Again, in the document, you can, at your leisure, see what each of these things mean, what they look like, but just highlighting that it gets increasingly complex. Typically, you'd also have more storage. Now, once you get into the indoor uses, you're going to see a fairly comprehensive filtration system. In the diagram here, the water purification system highlighted very small. This is not to scale. If you were to go in and look at an actual home, they can be quite significant systems. So just highlighting some of the tools in the checkbook, you can look right at the table of contents. We've organized it so that you can maneuver through the document fairly quickly, fairly easily. If you're looking for tips, if you're looking for professionals, if you're looking for when you might want to bring in a plumber, when you might want to bring in a rainwater specialist, that sort of thing. Just simple navigational tools. And just to highlight for a moment, there are checklists, and on page 77, there's one checklist I think is interesting and useful. It's almost like a calendar of what you need to do. If you owned a system, check for pollen, shut off the, it's actually quite useful. I was pleased with this component of the guide. It gets into very close detail what your task might be. And then finally on calculations, when I sort of off the cuff talk about the size of systems and that sort of thing, they get into these very detailed water balance tables which start to tell you how big your cistern has to be, that sort of thing. So I think everybody always wants to know how much do these systems cost. there's no telling, frankly. It depends on your sites, depends on where you're located, how much volume, whether it's potable or not. But those are sort of the big three up there. Is it potable or not potable? Are you bringing in the professionals to do all the work? And what's your total volume? And if you're looking at a full, professionally built, potable water system, we saw a system that was built for in the $20,000 to $30,000 range, and it was sort of a state-of-the-art, very impressive system, precast concrete under the garage, filtration. It was really nice. And clear water, amazing. So some lessons learned as we went through this. It wasn't a breeze. We realized that there are some challenges, again, at the local government level, things like codes and definitions. When you build a cistern, is it a structure? What are your definitions of a structure? Is there a concrete pad? And do you need a building permit? And so those are nuances that each jurisdiction would have to go through, and we kind of went through that the hard way. We spent more time than I would care to admit on trying to decide if a rainwater cistern was a structure. It is. But anyway, there's gaps, apparently, it looks like, in the legislation but for standards for water quality, particularly for rainwater. And I think that's getting clarified at the building code level as these sorts of things start to get more popular, but definitely not 100% clear. One other thing that we learned, there are different roof types, and I think page 94, 95 of the guide starts to outline, you can't collect rainwater and use it for your garden, for your consumption, off any roof. If you have a cedar roof, it's going to make it acidic. If you have a shingle roof, there might be antifungal agents in there. So things that, and when we start making regulations regarding requiring rainwater capture systems, not realizing that there could be impacts on the quality based on roof types, you get into a whole world of challenges that you wouldn't necessarily have anticipated. And I just throw this up there. The popularity of the document has made our printing costs go really high. So if you consider doing these kinds of things, just bear that in mind. And finally, just as another issue that arose, providing rainwater in the context of secondary suites and bed and breakfasts turns you into a water system. You're not just some guy with a rainwater tank. You are now sort of a provider, which I think a lot of people who own B&Bs don't know, because it's true also if you're on a well, but I'll just park that. So that's it. The next guidebook that we're doing is a residential scale renewable energy systems. We were pleased by the popularity of this book and that it was well received, so we're going to continue the series. We're always open to suggestions. We realize that this one is very electoral area and focus, sort of off-grid water systems. It's not really an economically viable approach if you're in a community supplied by a treated water system, unless you're very keen and want to be totally off-grid. But from an economics perspective, it's really more where you're in a community where water quality issues make your well water poor or availability is poor. So if compared to drilling another well, a rainwater system has the economics could play out for you. That's all I have, and feel free to ask questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Midgley. So yes, let's open the floor to questions from council. Councillor Neufeld.
Thanks very much, Chris. It was a really enjoyable presentation, and I enjoyed reading the text that you have put out. Good. I was really quite astounded, though, with respect to the difference in roof, if you have a cedar roof, a shingle roof, or a metal roof. We don't have any metal roofs here in town, very few of them, I think. And to replace a shingle roof would cost $15,000 to replace a shake roof with both metal and that significant cost. So, I mean, as you say, it really becomes an economic decision. But for those that are building new, and I think that Councillor Lefebvre has pointed to it, it's the way to go in the future, possibly, to go with a metal slate roof. And in fact, I've done that with a property that I have in Ontario. When you talk about the quality of water that comes off that roof, it comes off as pristine and as clean as is it potable water then when you bring it off a metal roof?
No, you're still going to need to go through multiple stages of filtration and purification. There's going to be, air pollution. There's going to be bird droppings. There's going to be other plant, needles from fir trees and whatnot will land on your roof. So you'll always need layers of filtration and debris removal and purification to high standards if you want to consume it for personal consumption. So you'll always also have that first flush diversion. So where that first water rushes off the roof, it'll carry away a lot of that junk and leave cleaner water for the remaining precipitation. What you won't get on a metal roof, you won't get things like fungal growth inhibitors, right, or moss growth inhibitors. You won't get high levels of acidity like you might get off a slate roof. Now, you can deal with those things through treatment, but it just expands the complexity of the system. The other problem is that it's kind of proprietary information, apparently, what goes into a shingle. So one competitor wants to, we have the best fungal or moss inhibitors. Well, okay, what is that? They won't tell you, so you don't know what chemicals might be going into the water supply. So that's where it gets really tricky.
Okay. Thank you very much. I enjoyed reading it. It was really interesting, and I thank you for the presentation as well.
Yeah, pleasure.
Councillor Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you very much for the presentation. I just wanted to see if there was, if you had any numbers as far as the uptake on, you said there was a refund available. How many people have actually gone ahead with systems like this?
Yeah, a rebate, I guess. So the rebate was partially for a cistern, partially for all the pipes, pumps, and so forth, up to a maximum of $750. I don't actually have the final numbers of how many households participated. I think there was $10,000 or $15,000, so not a huge amount, and it was exhausted quickly. We're looking at budget approval coming up in a month to determine whether or not that cistern will be available again. So we're hoping it's more significant this year. I think I don't have the numbers off the top of my head.
Just another question. You said your printing costs were escalating. Any reason you didn't just go with a web-based or a downloadable PDF?
Under direction of our directors who requested the document to be made available to all members of the community, we opted to follow that direction. Ordinarily, we wouldn't do that.
Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Chris. Good to hear the presentation again. Chris, I guess this is happening, as you mentioned, in the electoral areas, especially on some of the areas that are more isolated with regards to well water and well water quality and that sort of thing. They're embarking on that. What would the cost be if somebody wanted to cut back on the cost of watering the lawn, watering your garden, and washing your car, and not having to use municipal water? Ballpark, what are we talking about if you wanted to do that? I guess it varies, as you said earlier.
Well, yeah, it'll vary quite astronomically depending on the individual who's prepared to undertake the project. Like if it's a tinkerer, someone who's willing to do it by themselves, they'll save a lot of money rather than bringing in professionals to go every step of the way. I mean, you can get a rain barrel for a couple $100 and just put it under your downspout, and I mean, that won't carry you through the summer. If you're going to start needing, if you want to water a substantial lawn area, I think the document there outlines an outdoor use scenario where you'd capture 25,000 liters. I mean, you're still looking at five figures, 10 to 15,000. I would hate to put a number because I don't honestly know, but I would. There's cistern prices that gives you a dollar value per gallon of storage. So I'd suggest 7,000 to 10,000. That's, I think, what we're hearing from the development permit area.
Follow up, Your Worship. About a year ago, you and I attended a presentation in Nanaimo, and there was a company that had built, a construction company that had built a home in Nanaimo where they had the entire water system. And I think you might have alluded to that earlier, where they were using gray water for use within the property, and they were watering their lawns and that sort of thing. And I gathered that from what I recall, the overall construction of the home, with that included, was what, 2 to 4% of the total construction cost?
That's not the home I'm thinking of. The home I'm thinking of, they had a comprehensive renewable energy systems, gray water, rainwater, everything, and sort of built their home around those systems. I mean, considering that a comprehensive rainwater system would be $20,000 to $30,000, I would suggest that it's considerably more than a 2%. I mean, if you think of a home being $300,000 to $500,000, I mean, we're already in the 5 to 10% number there. But I don't know. I'd hate to mischaracterize without being out of touch with sort of the development community. It's not cheap.
Just before I go to Councillor Powell, I just at my business, not my home here, installed a 1,350-gallon cistern system with the UV disinfection and filtration. It was a little under $6,000. Okay. Having said that, because I have a health permit, they still won't let me put rainwater in it. I still have to get an approved via source to fill it. But it can add up. There's no question. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you very much for your presentation. So if we new build homes, would the cost be the same?
Well, new build, you're going to have you're always better off starting from new rather than trying to retrofit something on. So it'll proportionally it'll probably cost less, because I mean, if you're absorbing it into the cost of all the new construction, you might be able to take that a little bit better. And again, you won't have to consider things like changing the roof or punching through walls or anything like that. So I don't know if the savings doing it as a retrofit would be astronomical. You wouldn't cut the cost of the system in half by building it new necessarily. All the components still have to be purchased. So, I mean, probably better to do it new. You're going to have a more roof area. It's going to be better planned, but it may not be considerably less expensive.
Councillor Neufeld.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. Chris, I don't know if I know of the place that you're speaking of, but in fact, along River's Edge, there's a house, and I met a gentleman that has a humongous house there, and it's all metal and sheet, and he has 3 cisterns that 6,000 or 7,000, 8,000 gallons, not liters but gallons, and it is remarkable. He chose to build the house and build it, and he knew what he was doing up front a few years ago. And I can't recall the dollar figure that he gave to me, but it's a big house, and he needed a lot of water. But he was talking about 10 to 12% as far as cost. Okay. So it was really quite significant. It's not cheap by any means, but if you have no water, such as say South Australia or something like that, then it's something. And this gentleman happens to be other than Canadian, and he happens to come here and enjoy our paradise.
Right.
Thank you.
Further questions? It's interesting, and I'm very glad to hear that the regional district is even focusing on the electoral areas, and certainly the development permit area in Cedar is encouraging. We are impacted here in the city by what occurs obviously outside in the rural areas, and the more that we can essentially more efficiently use the available water supply, I think the better for everyone within the region. And I can't help but remember just last year being in Hawaii on the Big Island in the area where they have a lot of the volcanic activity still. Of course, the groundwater is essentially spoiled. There's virtually little or none available, and happened to take a little scenic flight around that area, and in every single backyard is a rainwater catchment system, and it's just common. So, where there's a need, there's a way, and it can absolutely happen on a larger scale. And when you think about all that we're doing here at the city, for instance, with our ASR system, which is in effect just a massive scale rainwater catchment system. That's really what it is, although we're taking it out of a river. It's that river that's swollen by snow and rainfall that we're capturing and putting it into the ground. So, I think it is absolutely our future here. It's all about storage with this tremendous supply offset that we have with our demand time. And so I just very encouraged to see the ongoing work of the regional district in this area, and it's a great booklet and a great start.
Thank you.
Anything further, Mr. Midgley? Or
No, just
good?
thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, no, we really appreciate taking the time to give us an update. Thank you.
Whoops, sorry.
All right, moving on, ladies and gentlemen, we're now into the third section, which is staff presentations. And Mrs. Thomas, would you please give us the background on the report from yourself regarding the Wood First policy for municipally funded buildings?
Yes, Your Worship. This report is provided in response to Council's request for consideration of a Wood First policy for the City of Parksville. The Wood First Act was created to facilitate the use of wood as the primary building material in all new provincially funded buildings in a manner consistent with the BC Building Code. Under the Wood First policy as provided in the staff report, design and construction teams for municipally funded projects would be required to consider the use of wood where it is economically competitive with other materials. Staff recommendations are as per the Council agenda, Your Worship.
All right, thank you. So we do have a recommendation before us. Does anyone wish to bring that forward? Moved by Councillor Lefebvre, seconded by Councillor Powell. Discussion. Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Worship. Very, very briefly, we had brought this up back in 2011 as staff have attached to the report on page 11. This is simply following through with something that makes a lot of sense in our area. We want to support the wood industry. Wood is a renewable resource, and we have lots of it, so it makes a lot of sense where it's economically feasible.
All right, thank you. Councillor Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I took the opportunity to speak with members of the building community. I can't say that this is met tremendously well. I understand the need to support our logging industry, but like the report says, wood is the cheapest building material, and I think we use it whenever possible to make sure that we're in line with budgets. Personally, I see this as kind of another use of staff resources and another hurdle for people to jump. I don't see the necessity for, we already have the form and character for the exterior of buildings to do wood and stone, which is reiterated in here. It's also in the new OCP. I understand that this came forward before I came on council, and I know it's a provincial mandate and the scope is fairly limited to strictly municipal buildings, but I see it as an unnecessary addition to what we already have.
All right, thank you, Councillor Morrison. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. I do have a couple questions for you to the Director of Administrative Services. The environmentally responsible, from forest managed in an environmentally responsible manner, is there some sort of a seal that they receive when they harvest the wood to show that it has been harvested responsibly?
Yes.
Okay. And so you talk about our GHG emissions. How much would they go down, do you know?
It would depend on the size of the project. It's pretty hard to determine how many would go down with that without knowing the actual parameters of a development.
Okay. I see that you went with policy rather than a bylaw, and that's to allow some flexibility, so the developer isn't necessarily like stuck on providing that. So it's sort of like our environmental checklist and our sustainability checklist. It's just a way for us to measure. So there's not really...
It's not a definitive requirement to go with Wood First. It is basically a direction to look at in terms of the overall scope of a project as to what the best material would be, and given two materials being equal and one of them being wood, the preference being given to wood.
One more question. So would there be sort of like a point system for the RFPs? Because I know they do that grading. So would that be part of the grading?
Well, no, in the RFPs, the RFP would go out with the consideration that would be one of the materials that is evaluated in the process of determining what kind of construction would be done. And it would depend on the expertise of the builder, developer, engineer with wood development, that how they would use wood, the creativity, that would be measured along with all of the other materials that could come forward, whether it's a concrete building or a metal building or a steel building. And we'd look at efficiency and economy and all of those different characteristics before making a final decision.
Councillor Newfeld.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. And my question really is a bit of a follow-up from Councillor Powell's as well. You know, the best carbon sink for community is actually a living forest. So if we start to cut it down, transport it, saw it up, and put it in place, there's a lot of emissions there that we're concerned about as far as greenhouse emissions. So when we start to look at greenhouse emissions, are we taking that into consideration as opposed to, say, using MACO for a construction? And will this have an impact as far as our ability to get funding from the province? The province says they would prefer to have us put up a wood frame structure and use cladding that is wood and make it, you know, lovely and attractive. And I'm quite willing to go along with that. But even when I looked at the cost of using dead wood, such as the pine beetle deforestation, wood is still expensive, and it's labor intensive. What is the mix here that the province is looking for, and are we going to be caught in the middle of having to put up, say, a new building such as the water treatment center that will be at a cost disadvantage to us, and I would hope that this would not occur.
Well, the provincial government enacted the Wood First Act for provincially funded facilities. And if it is a provincially funded facility and not a partnership with the municipality, we really don't have a lot of control over what they build it out of or how they build it. Like, for instance, the new healthcare center, that's a provincially funded facility, and they will use the building materials in accordance with the building code that they see fit to use. The policy, and as Councillor Powell noted, it is a policy because that gives us the ability to be more flexible in terms of its imposition. And we're looking at municipally funded projects here, or where the majority of funding is municipally funded, and looking to ensure that the design teams look at wood as one of the options and evaluate it in accordance with other types of building materials such as steel or concrete to ensure that we are using the most suitable and most economical building product. So we're not requiring it at this point. We're saying we need to use it in terms of evaluating the various products available for construction.
Follow-up?
If you would, thank you very much, Your Worship. I think the wood is great, and you know, the solid wood is tremendous. One of the things that in building a new product such as the health center, it's a labor-intensive type proposition, and I just have the impression that the province is looking to jobs as opposed to the construction of a new facility, and I'm sort of torn between what are we trying to do? Prevent the employment numbers from going down or up or whatever and changing, and as opposed to getting the best type of structure that we can. And it may be clad, it may be clad in wood or whatever, but I happen to be a proponent for steel and concrete. And that's my own personal bent.
let me jump in there just a little bit, notwithstanding what you said. If I, and perhaps other members of council can help me, if I recall correctly, this really came about around the time that we had the pine beetle epidemic in the central part of the province, and it was very much on the province's mind to try and bolster the use of local wood. Obviously, I won't get into the reasons why, I think they're obvious. And it also is a reflection on the extent to which our provincial economy still relies upon logging, and you know all of the controversy about exporting raw logs as opposed to secondary manufacturing, and again trying to create more of a domestic demand for wood products. So I think that was the context, and at the time, you know, on that scale, I think there could be a substantial impact in those industries if the province holds true to this Wood First Act, which they have apparently done so. As you pare it down to our level, given that this is only related again to specifically our infrastructure and what we're moving forward as a municipality on, I don't know if it really is all that impactful, and I think perhaps Councillor Morrison's points are somewhat applicable in some of those circumstances. From my perspective, you know, recognizing that this is something that I think provincially we're trying to move forward on, I don't have too much of an issue with this, although it should be noted that when you set a policy, you're directing staff, in effect, to take those things into account as it's been spelled out in the draft policy before. So, and I think staff have explained as clearly as you could that, you know, we're still not going to automatically force the use of wood if it doesn't make sense. I think it would be a way to capitalize on it, but that's sort of my perspective, and so I would be supporting it, but I wouldn't beat anybody up who doesn't either. Councillor Powell?
Thank you, Worship. And just to clarify, through you to the Director of Administrative Services, on page 15, the very first paragraphs, when you're issuing a request for proposals, where it says that you would have require the proponents to provide details of their expertise, experience, and excellence in utilizing wood in the design. So if you have somebody that, would that eliminate them from the process if they didn't have that expertise?
It's a little difficult to evaluate that particular clause without a specific project to tie it to, because it would depend on the type of project it is. And it would depend on the type of, at the end of the day, we may request that they include that in the RFP, but at the end of the day, wood may not be the product that makes the most sense for that particular construction project. So if the argument is made or the information is provided that through the evaluation process it's determined that concrete or steel or something else is a better product to use, then that's probably the direction we would go in. But without a specific RFP to evaluate that against, it's pretty difficult to.
All right, just to follow up from Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. Sorry, I think you misunderstood me. I'm talking about the requirements of the proponents to provide details of their expertise and experience, and it's not what the job would require, it's what they bring to the table. And if they don't have that expertise, well, at a later date, will they be vetted out?
In the course of issuing the RFP, we don't normally make the determination at that point in time what types of material would be used. So we would make this as a clause within the RFP, but it would be only one factor by which that RFP would be evaluated. So it may or may not be given a higher weight depending upon what the needs of that particular RFP are.
Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Worship. With regards to Councillor Powell's last question, I think that there's two words in that paragraph number 2. It says where appropriate. And I think that the safeguard here in the way that the policy is written is it's to consider the use of wood where it is economically competitive with other materials. That's the key. So I mean, I don't see any problem with this whatsoever. It's fairly clear, and you know, it may be somewhat motherhood, apple pie and baby kissing, but nevertheless, you know, BC is a great producer of wood products, and as I said in my earlier remarks, wood is a renewable resource and it acts as a sequester to carbon. It meets the, as in the sustainability implications on page 9, it meets the, which impacts the effects of greenhouse gas emissions and therefore supports the objective of the Climate Action Charter. So it's pretty substantial statement. So again, I come back to the fact that it's where it is economically competitive, and I don't see any problem with that whatsoever.
Councillor Powell-Davidson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just going to add on to what Councillor Fabe was speaking in terms of not seeing a problem with supporting this for the environmental and sustainability implications. But still on page 9, just reading in regards to the city's official community plan, the form and character references in the development permit areas do suggest that we are encouraging developers to be in keeping with utilizing emphasizing the natural character of our area, so we're encouraging them already. And I think that this recommendation from staff just further supports it, that we do want to see these natural products being utilized in the construction, such as wood and stone. And just to add further to that, we had so many houses built here about 20 years ago that were vinyl and aluminum sided. And, you know, you think about the implications of that down the road, another 30 or 40 years when those houses start to fall apart and need to be replaced. What happens to all those materials that are being taken off if they were used? Not to mention that if some of them should happen to meet with burning, some of the materials end up being burned somewhere, either in a house fire or later on in landfill or what have you. I mean, the toxicity from those products is something fierce. So I have no problem supporting this. I think this is a move in the right direction.
All right, thank you. No further discussion. This is at recommendation level. We'll be back here again once it reaches council, assuming that it passes. All right, all in favor? Opposed? And that is carried. We're now moving on to adjournment. Need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Powell-Davidson. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And before we move into the actual council meeting, are there any questions from members of the audience or the media? Said that just for you. Okay, it doesn't look that way, so we will continue on. So let us proceed now into our